understanding of the market dynamics, the operational reality of the business.
I think the plan before was very different than the plan after 2011. The funds that are starting support programs, like 500 startups and the like, how much of an EBITDA multiple? 20x, 25x, that's very generous.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Alchemy of Transformation, where we get into the grips of what makes individuals, what makes ventures, societies, economies grow. And today we have the topic, which is the alchemy of venture creation. We have with us someone who's probably in the emerging markets, particularly in MENA region, is one of the most experienced venture enabler, venture creator, Ayman Ismail. Ayman is a dear friend, and we go back about 10 to 12 years in Boston, probably 2010, when Ayman was a fellow at MIT. He finished his PhD over there, and I was a graduate student at the Kennedy School of Government. We met at a cafe in Central Square. I believe it's called the Andala Cafe. Over a period of time, his advice and his help, connections in the Middle East, set me on a career path that took me to Jordan, to Lebanon, to Dubai, and eventually back to Pakistan. And so Ayman is someone who knows the region very well, has been extremely influential in Egypt in this venture space. He has an undergraduate in construction engineering from the American University of Cairo. So from construction of buildings, construction engineering, to construction of building of ventures. It's been a long journey. He has a PhD from MIT in international development. He's worked with McKinsey. He's worked as a development advisor. But coming back from MIT back to Egypt in early 2010s, and then set up the AUC Venture Capital Lab in 2013. At that time, ventures were not the vogue. There was mostly private equity. So certainly Ayman saw something in that space much earlier on than anyone else, and was able to build one of a very successful incubation program in a university across the whole of emerging markets. And today we will learn more about the AUC Venture Capital Lab, what has been the reason or the secret sauce or the alchemy of success. So please join me in welcoming Ayman Ismail. Ayman, good to be with you, friend. And how is it going back in Cairo these days?
Good to be with you, Ahmed. Cairo's fantastic. Summer has started early, so we're having a very hot week, and everybody's excited as always, running around and busy.
You know, I'm living in Karachi. Karachi is very much like Cairo, chaotic. In some ways, we are more chaotic, but I think in traffic, you guys are way ahead of us. I've been to Cairo, and believe me, I don't want to drive in Cairo. But you know, Cairo and Karachi are very similar cities. So great to have you here. And you know, we've discussed how you've been very instrumental in my Middle East, in the MENA region. Your introduction to Reem Khouri many years ago got me to work in the other ventures, and then there onwards in Amman. And so once again, I want to thank you for the help that you gave me, but also tells me that because the mind of a venture capital is a mind of giving, is an open mind, and is a mind that is ever helpful without expecting back in return. And I think sometimes in our culture, we don't understand that. We want to hold things to ourselves rather than give it away. So I think if I were to say that I think I saw in your interaction with me, one of the reasons why you've been successful at AUC. But we'll talk more about it. Tell us more about yourself. Tell us more about your background, where you come from, your upbringing, the story of self, as we call it.
Thank you, Ahmed. Story of self is very simple. I grew up in Cairo, went to schools here, and most of my time, both my parents were architects, and I aspired to be like them, an architect. And that was my plan. But the one thing I realized very early is that you can plan as much as you want, but serendipity and life takes you in different directions that you have not planned before. So one day I was taking a class with a friend of mine, and he was driving, and he said, "Well, I need to go and pick up an application." I said, "For what?" He said, "For I want to apply for the American University in Cairo." His sister was studying there, so I told him, "What is that?" I didn't know much about it at the time. So I said, "Let's just walk in." And we walked in, and he got his application. And he said, "The deadline is tomorrow. Why don't you pick up an application as well?" I said, "Okay, I'll pick one up." I went home. I told my parents. I said, "Yeah, we know all about it. Why didn't you tell me about that?" And he said, "Well, we don't have architecture, and we didn't think you were interested." I said, "Okay, I'll apply and let me see." And I applied, and a few months later, I was actually a student there. And I think that was transformed my life, because my experience at AUC was not about just the academic side. There was a lot of other things that took me to different directions. I was part of a student club called ISEC, International Association of Students in Economics and Commerce, and I traveled a lot with them. I did, at that time, it was very novel, the Model United Nations and Model Arab Leagues. It got me to interact with people who were in politics and diplomacy. And interesting enough, half of the people that were my friends from that program are actually now working in the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the spokesman, a bunch of ambassadors. They're old friends from that space. So I got exposed to a very different and diverse world, and I think it shaped who I am in a big part and what I wanted to do. After that, I worked a little bit with my father. He had a practice that was working on city planning. I got introduced into technology, geographic information systems, and all the technology that was very nascent at the time, but I learned a lot. In the meantime, I did my MBA in Egypt. At that point, MBAs did not require work experience, so I did a program right after undergrad. And it was good, but it was not your kind of typical MBA experience. It was, I would call it, more of an extension, a second bachelor. So I spent a lot of time in university studying, and then I was applying for my PhD. That was my aspiration and plan. Got into very interesting spaces. I actually got accepted into Chevening scholarship, which is very prestigious in Egypt. But then I also got an opportunity to go to MIT. And I don't think I would have had that opportunity if it was not for the niche that I was applying for. I was applying for a very specific niche, looking at geographic information systems. And there was a professor there who was leading that space, Joe Ferreira, and I was lucky to get accepted in that program. So I went there, worked with him for 2 years. The very, very first, what at that time they called them digital orthophotos, the pictures of the Earth, like what we now see in Google Maps. The very, very first server was actually right under my desk, and it was developed in a project by my advisor, Joe Ferreira, at the time. Really cutting edge. Is actually trying to get those aerial pictures and stitch them and put them in a nice interface that eventually became what we have in Google Maps. That was literally sitting under my desk, and I was lucky to work with him on some very interesting applications. After that, I started on my PhD. Was not very happy for some personal reasons, so I decided to drop out. So I actually dropped out after my first semester. Ended up in a great place, can't complain, in McKinsey, at a very interesting time. That was right before the dot-com collapse, during the dot-com boom. So I joined when the whole euphoria of dot-coms and startups was at its peak. And I saw that because we used to have a person literally leaving the McKinsey office every week to join a startup. If you think what we had in the past 3-4 years was something, no, that was nothing to compare. That was just a minor blip compared to what was happening in 1999, 2000, in that world. So I was lucky to see kind of the last year of that huge dot-com boom. And then I saw the crash, and I literally saw it live. At that point, I did a lot of consulting with fast-growing startups. That was very new for McKinsey at the time to get into that space, but it was so exciting and lucrative. And I saw companies, people trying to build companies, and then I saw the collapse, and I saw a lot of wealth wiped out, many promising startups basically disappearing overnight, interesting stories. And then the survival after that, very, very rough 2 years. When you see a recession, a real recession, it kind of, you get a mark in your life, because it tells you what it looks like. And I think it always stays with you in your decisions, because you understand that economies and life in general, it's cyclical. There are ups and downs. And when you're at the top or you're at a high, it's great to enjoy it, but you should always remember that it's at some point in time there's going to be a low point, and you need to be ready for it, and also survive the low points, actually end up surviving over the long term. And when you get people who have not been through that cycle, there is kind of that naivety that they that marks their thinking. So anyway, I saw that, stayed there for 5 years, probably a little bit longer than I should have. And then I decided to go back to my PhD. I went back. I did not want to go back to the tech part. I wanted to go back to the business side. So I ended up in a very interesting program back in MIT, same department, but different group, that's looking at economic development and emerging markets. And I had a fantastic advisor, Alice Amsden. She was, I have to say, she was a rogue. She was someone who's a very, very unorthodox. And her biggest accomplishment in life was basically questioning orthodox theories, orthodox thinking, getting into meetings with people from the World Bank and telling them how wrong they are, getting into business academics and telling them that the theories are junk. She was quite a character. And
what was her name?
Alice Amsden.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. She wrote several interesting books, especially on Asia, on how the emerging countries in Asia developed, and their stories and an alternative narrative. I mean, most of what you read, if you go and read in the literature, they tell you that it was all about markets, open markets, free markets. And her story that, no, it was not. It was a lot of state-led developments, but with a lot of private sector involved, with very intricate relationships between both that actually managed to get those countries to where they are. Very interesting narrative, very alternative. You can criticize it. A lot of people criticized her thinking, but she was a very, very critical person. One thing I learned from her was, if you want to do something interesting in research, you go to the areas that are uncharted. You go to places where people don't have a lot of data. Because when people have a lot of data, then everybody's doing research on it, and it becomes kind of the norm. So every time I tell her, I'm looking at the MENA region, but there's no data. And she said, that's why it's interesting, because nobody has done research, because all the researchers go to where the ready data is, and they basically repeat each other's work. So go and try to find something, do a lot of qualitative work, talk to people, and you'll find interesting stories. So I ended up doing my research on, at that point, the private equity and venture capital. They were both lumped together, but it was more private equity than venture capital in the MENA region. I talked to all the people who were there in that space at the time, interesting stories. And then I was doing also a lot of consulting during my PhD. Part of it is making money, and whenever I find an opportunity. So I got into some very interesting projects. I worked with the Chief Technology Officer of the New York Times at that point, creating the technology startup strategy for the New York Times, and then launching the paywall. Everybody in the newspaper industry was transitioning from selling newspapers to actually selling online. Worked a lot with them on that part. I even wrote literally the business and technical specs for the New York Times paywall with people in the team there. Did strategy and operations project with a fashion company in New York that was doing selling T-shirts for kids, very diverse things. Started my consulting company in the US with my brother and did some projects there. And around 2010, it was about time to see what things look like in Egypt. So I said, you know what, let me go and check out what's happening. So I came back to spend time with my parents and look for opportunities on Christmas Day 2010. And just relaxing, chilling, talking to people in the business. And then literally 30 days later, Jan 25th, we have the biggest uprising. Exactly. Regions changing and everything, and life is changing, and you just got completely swamped into it. I've been going back and forth, but I decided, you know what, let me figure out what's happening. It was not a decision to permanently move or do anything. It was just, let me figure out what on earth is happening in Egypt and the region. It was
we'll tackle this part of your story later on, but it's very interesting because, you know, there's a culture which I got accustomed to in living in Jordan, that your surname, that being an engineer with your name is highly respected. So not only you were an engineer, but you also became a doctor. So both signs of respect, because culturally, I think that's very, very important. The other thing that was very interesting is your thesis supervisor, and I actually have come to the same conclusion. And what she's saying is that that most of development is actually state-led, and even if you look at South Korea or Chile, there was a lot of government-led projects, and the private sector, whether you call it crony capitalism or to some extent, you know, elite capture to some extent, but they were able to build the private sector, particularly South Korea and Chile, which became self-supporting, self-sustaining. And so the very interesting question is that why does South Korea succeed, but Pakistan doesn't? You know, because we do have that kind of elite capture. So what kind of elites do you need? And of course, it has to be driven by the elites. And I'm not the person who would lament, about the elites, because, you know, they are the ones who drive change and drive the society forward. So it's interesting that your thesis supervisor had that theory, because this is something that I've also over a period of time come to realize. And in Pakistan, we have these business elites, but unfortunately, most of the time, they don't build competitive advantage. They rely on government license, government protection against imports, and they are very, very well off themselves, but they don't build a Daewoo or a Hyundai, or in case of Turkey, like a Coach Group or a Sabanci Group. You know, that didn't happen. So it's very interesting that you also were in that area. So and so how was that experience of being in the US, of working in McKinsey over there, and seeing failing companies? Because I do relate to that. I was part of an organization called Arthur Andersen, and the Accenture Consulting in those days was, you know, the biggest technology company, and its CEO, global CEO, MD, a gentleman by the name of George Shaheen, left for a startup called Webware. And there was another company startup called Pets.com. And unfortunately, all of them went down, but there were big names that went up there. So tell us a little bit more about your experience of the US, and what did you learn about dynamism, about innovation, about success, failure, that later on helped you when you were, you know, applying that? Because these things are not natural to our economies or societies, which the way US works. So more about that.
Yeah, this was very interesting. The time that I spent in academia was one part. I learned a lot, and it took me to a different level. But the years that I spent in McKinsey were actually very, I'd say, very special. So just to put this in perspective, I joined McKinsey in January 2020. Okay, and I believe
March 2020 was the Nasdaq collapse. Start of the collapse.
Yeah. Exactly. I think that I was the very first Egyptian who was educated in Egypt to join McKinsey. So there were a couple of people there, but they were educated in Stanford, in the US, they're kind of Egyptian Americans. But I don't think that at that point in time, those companies were really closed and insular. And they had people who came from very specific backgrounds, mostly Ivy League, mostly American, and then later European. And by being there, the amount of learning and exposure that I had, I think it was just unbelievable. So first, you're literally solving CEO problems, regardless of the companies that you're at. You're solving CEO problems, you're getting exposed to CEO problems. And that's and we're not talking CEO problems in emerging markets, we're talking top companies, Fortune 50, Fortune 100, being present in board presentations, in very senior discussions there, and understanding or seeing the mindset of thinking. And I don't think that many people have had that experience at that point. Now, because we have those companies in our part of the world, so there is a new generation that's getting exposed to that. But 25 years ago, it was pretty much none. And understanding literally how the business world at that level works was actually very insightful. And I would love, I spent all of my life trying to transform this experience to Egypt and our part of the world, but honestly, I don't think that much of that has happened. So that's one thing. Understanding the power of the networks that are there. You can talk about opportunity as much as you want, but it's all about who you know and who is able to make the introduction, the connection, to put you in the room with other people. That part is really powerful. And some people in our part of the region, because of their upbringing, being, as you mentioned, being part of a social elite, they have that inherently, but other people don't have access to that, and they don't see where it's coming or how it affects actually that access, how it affects business and how it affects other access to opportunities. So people talk about it, but you don't see it firsthand. And you'd be surprised that you see it actually happening in New York, out of all places. So it's being able to make the call to your friend who was in ex-McKinsey and now works, I don't know, in whatever investment bank or private equity or venture capital or whatever they are. So that network, the power of networks, I think was very insightful as well. Third thing is the mentorship. McKinsey is actually very much based on mentorship. And I've met actually really amazing people there. Someone like Michael Bush, who was a partner. I worked with him. I was a new kid, literally a new kid. And the guy was a very senior guy, one of the smartest people I ever met. And he would walk into the team room and we're working on a presentation, and the deadline is in an hour, and he's going to take this presentation, present it to the board. And rather than the guy coming in and just saying, show me the outcome, show me the books, like, oh, guys, you're all busy. Okay, so what do you want for lunch? Let me go and grab some sandwiches for you. And he takes the orders from the young kids, the associates and the managers, and he takes the order for sandwiches. He goes and gets the sandwiches for people. And you just see that the guy is really smart, but he's also socially smart. He understands the pressure, understands the time, where you are, and he's actually literally helping in the only way he can do at that point in time. Very interesting dynamics and very interesting mentorship that you can see. Big picture, you also see what's happening in the economy and how the companies actually work on it. So the upside, it was all about talent. Can we attract the right talent? And I saw the downside, and it was all about cutting costs. Can you beat the numbers? Can you meet the numbers? And the upside, it was all growth strategy, hiring at any cost, growth at any cost. If you think growth at any cost was invented 2 years ago, you're mistaken. You look at the downside, it was all about cost cutting. I spent 2 years that were probably the most miserable in my life working on cost cutting projects. You walk in, you work for a client, his job is to cut the cost of the organization.
You've forgotten another McKinsey term, another McKinsey book from that times, War for Talent.
Oh yes, of course. It was a war for talent practice. And it is there. Whenever you're on the upside, it's a war for talent. Whenever you're on the downside, it's about financial survival. And you see both, and they're very different mindsets, very different playbooks. But if you understand those playbooks, you understand, first thing you understand is that every time has a different playbook, and every period has a different playbook. And if you work by that playbook, you get there. And those who win are the ones who understand the different playbooks. You're not playing by the upside playbook when it's downside, because that's not going to work, and vice versa. So you understand that change in the macro environment affects you a lot. So whatever I'm doing, I'm always keeping an eye on the macro environment. In our region, it's actually 10 times more influential because the macro is really affecting everything you're doing.
Yes.
So I'm working with a startup. I tell them, guys, you have to close the round right now. You really, really have to go fast in closing the round because something big is going to happen and you don't want to be left without cash. And that's exactly what happens. Those who close the round before the crisis are doing very well because they have cash. They can do whatever they want. Those who did not, great companies, by the way, but they're struggling and some of them are folding because if you're running out of cash in a downtime, nobody's going to see you. So these are things that you actually see and you understand. When you're in up times, it's all about who moves fast. The faster gets to the opportunity. When it's downtime, it's about who's the last man standing, who's the person who's going to be there, who would survive.
Very good. Interesting.
So very, very different insights, and I think it's not just being in McKinsey or in New York, the most interesting company in the most interesting city in the world. It's about being in 180 degrees contradictory times and immediately after each other. It's you're moving from the hot to the cold immediately. That was an eye-opening experience for me.
So, Ayman, I think in the next second part of this, I would like to also, you talked about McKinsey being a great learning ground, but in the next part, as you go towards more operations and more into scaling up, we will like to talk about more where McKinsey comes in lacking, because a lot of it is high-level strategy without on-ground, in-depth operational reality of the business, because that's where McKinsey has also got a lot of criticism from, and so that's something that you may have, and I would like to hear your views when we talk about your experience at AUC. May have experience where the McKinsey experience had gaps or was lacking. But anyways, I think we will talk about that later. But in that sense, I think the McKinsey experience definitely being an advisor to CEOs, seeing at a very holistic level the problems faced by the companies and how companies react to it, I think must have been very, very interesting, particularly if you're one of the very few people with your kind of background, operating at that level of corporate American, top corporate America. I think that must have been a fascinating experience. So now you're going towards, you're going back home, and now you've faced the Tahrir Square. Really, the story that we always have is the micro of emerging markets is very interesting, and it's the macro which is dark and the darkened clouds. But guys, if you can look through the macro, the micro is very interesting and the companies are really growing. But then you come across a situation where the macro is messed up and also the micro is really chaotic. And then what do you do? How did it go about at that time?
Yeah, Egypt in 2011 was a very interesting place. It still feels like yesterday. It's now well used since then. But it feels very, probably for anybody who was here in Cairo in 2011 to 2013, it's probably it's very dominant in your thinking, because it was a very unusual time in history. You can see several things. One is change happening, and it's not always easy to explain. People take 2011 for granted, and a lot of people explain what happened with their own narratives. But I still don't think we know why and what and how it happened. It's a very interesting times. And we can talk about this, and it's probably going to get into a lot of the politics and the previous politics and all of that. But it's actually very important to understand why and what and all of that happened to have that would shape everyone's worldview. And I think different people have different narratives, and that has been shaping a big part of the region, by the way, what happened in 2011 in Egypt. But anyway, several things that you learn out of that. We always complain about bureaucracy, institutional rigidity that you have in Egypt. But then you realize actually those institutional rigidities that you have were one of the reasons why the country actually survived very well through those turbulent years. We had 2 years where there was a lot of turbulence, pretty much no strong government in place, government changing every other week, ministers can't even always get to their offices and so on. But you go to any government office and it was functioning. You can do your papers, you can get the things done, the banks were there, the roads were there, everything was actually functioning. Outside of the small revolutionary sphere, everything was pretty much the norm. People were getting married, economy was continuing. The informal economy became a lot more powerful, but you do understand why countries like Egypt are resilient. From one side, institutional rigidity, those institutions were operating regardless of what's happening. On the other side, the informality, the informal sector and the economy was very agile. And that those two things together kept the country going. Just to put things in perspective, Indonesia, when they had similar uprising a few years earlier, their GDP went down by 18% in a year until it recovered the following year. In Egypt, for the 2 or 3 years where we had the uprising, our GDP was growing by 2%. So it went down from 6 to 7% growth to 2%, but it was still growing. Where did that growth come from? It came from the informal sector. Not all great, but it tells you that you can continue and survive in different ways. And that is, that's basically one of the learnings that I got from this side. So anyway, one thing that happened out of those uprising days is that a lot of youth felt that they want to do something different, and that actually fueled the entrepreneurial side. So you got a lot of people who were saying, you know what, these are revolutionary time. We want to also do something different in our lives. So let's go and look at starting a business. Let's look at what's happening in the world, the tech opportunities, connecting with people, diaspora coming back, people from different countries and connecting together. So very interesting time, and I think it pushed a lot of change in the culture. So we started seeing entrepreneurship support organizations and interest in that space coming big time. Youth was were coming prominent as a keyword, and that was also happening in the economy. And I think that was part of the build-up for the startup environment in Egypt. Remember, we always had startups, but it was mostly in traditional sectors. So what we're talking about is kind of the tech-enabled ecosystem that is more around startups, incubators, accelerators, venture capital, those types of this small niche. And even though it's a small niche, it's very influential. So this is where we are right now, that build-up.
It's interesting that you talk about the Arab Spring. And it seems like the Arab Spring was the launch pad for this startup boom or startup mindset or interest in startup happened. And you're absolutely right. One has to look at what was the root causes of the Arab Spring to see what societal changes had happened and led to that catalyst. And I think one of them was the education system, and this is my reading about it, was very much geared towards producing people who worked in the public sector. And generally, that is something that is very prestigious in Pakistan, I would imagine, in Egypt. And so when the government sector didn't have the money to hire a lot of these people, of course, a lot more unemployment and frustration started to build up. And what we didn't have is the private sector, which is robust enough to create enough jobs, to create enough wealth to absorb some of the young talent pool. And I assume that some of the reasons that a lot more interest went into startups was as a way to create more economic activity, because previously the whole economy was geared towards the public sector. Would you agree with that? And is that one of the reasons why you feel that subsequently startups have got more attention?
I think the shift from government, working in the government sector, to working in the private sector was actually happening a lot earlier, much earlier in Egypt, in the 80s and 90s. It was happening, but it was very different. It had a different look and feel, different kinds of companies, different kinds of organizations. In the 2000s, we had a big push to the private sector, but it was mostly focused on large corporate, whether domestic or international, focusing on traditional businesses. I think the new part was the tech part. When you look at that period of time, you had a huge number of people getting on social media, a large number of people connecting on mobiles, and having data access specifically. So that digital transformation, plus the young people coming and kind of getting a lot more engaged. So all of these things were part of the push, but I cannot say that it started there. It started earlier, a lot earlier than that, and this was just a moving part, or a part that gave it a bigger push. But if you look at it, tech was happening everywhere in the world. This is not an Egypt phenomenon. So I would not just say that this happened because of the Arab Spring. You see the startup ecosystems emerging everywhere in the world, even in Europe, in Asia, in India, in Pakistan, in Saudi, in South Africa. So there was kind of something that was happening at the time.
I was in Amman in 2010, in the summer of 2010, and YouTube had happened. If you remember, in 2008, 2009, and Amman was buzzing. I think Amman was the first, I would say, the capital that was buzzing with startups. And Arabia, Oasis 500, and those kind of initiatives started. A lot of, Endeavor and those things actually started in Amman. So I do, and I think Maktoum was quite instrumental in giving hope to Middle East as being the first big. I think it was a $65 million exit. Nowadays, it's not a big deal, but in those days, it was really the first one, the big one. And I think that created a lot of hope. And I think that's how later on Dubai and then Egypt also got onto that wave.
Yeah, absolutely. Maktoum was instrumental. In Egypt, we had Link.net, $110 million exit for an ISP. So you have those kind of initial stories that were kind of planting the seeds, showing people, here's a model, you want to go after that route. And I think those were very inspirational. So it was many things happening at one point in time. Technology, youth getting more engaged, the telecom, connectivity, some role models coming, some enablers. So when you put all of these things together, you get a very interesting story of what's happening at that point in time.
And so tell me us about your time in AUC, American University of Cairo. We know universities, we talk about institutional rigidity. Elite universities like AUC are of course very conservative. They don't want to bring about change. So how was this idea of venture, innovation, incubation was received in AUC? Because it's not easy. I know from certain examples in Pakistan where some of the people behind it took them a long time to get this idea accepted. Of course, Henry Kissinger would say about academics that the academic fights in politics are so vicious because the stakes are so low. He used to make a joke about that. So there is a lot of politics. So tell us about your entry into AUC or re-entry into AUC, and how did it come about and did lead to the innovation and then eventually the VC lab?
Yeah, again, it's back to serendipity. I was sitting in New York, and then a friend of mine sent me an opening at AUC for a position in entrepreneurship. I thought that was exciting, so I filled an application and I sent it. And then I haven't heard back from them for about 6 or 7 or 8 months after that. It was just going through the selection process. But then you look at the background, 2010, we had a new dean at the School of Business appointed, and he was an old friend of mine, a very visionary person, fantastic professor. And he wanted to bring entrepreneurship, innovation, and leadership to the school as the new pillars and push around that. So he had an opening, decided, you know what, let me get someone who would help in building up this entrepreneurship part. So I'm sitting back in Egypt, 6, 7, 8 months after that, in April 2011, and after the revolution and the uprising of people in the street, and I get a call from them saying, well, we want to talk to you about this, so let's have a Zoom call. I had the Zoom call with them, and said a couple of months later, I got an offer saying, why don't you join? I said, okay, let me try and join that. And it was very interesting times. I think the plan before was very different than the plan after 2011. So I joined the AUC. There was literally nothing around entrepreneurship. It was a very traditional business school, focusing on training people to work in large corporates, whether local or international, multinational companies, and very little in terms of the entrepreneurial part. And I don't think that was specific to AUC. It was probably most of the business schools all over the world were like that. You were training people to be managers of large companies because the economy was dominated by large companies. And entrepreneurship usually was kind of the idiosyncratic thing that came from outside of the system, from people who are very different, and it was so niche for anybody to focus on. Now it's everything, everybody's working on it, but it was not like that 12, 14 years ago. I come into AUC and started working on basically activities that would trigger things, very simple, short, low cost or no cost activities that would trigger the community, get people exposed, get people to learn about what's happening. If you have 2, 3 success stories, you try to basically highlight those success stories. You try to connect with people doing things in different parts of the world. You try to find any nuggets of knowledge and expose it. You just wanted to create noise. You wanted to create something that says the space exists. 2011, we started working on a plan for our own accelerator incubator, named it Matter at the time. Tried to get funding for it, but in the time of an uprising, that was very hard to do. So 2012, we decided to do it ourselves. We're bootstrapping, literally, no funding, very little funding. So I just got a space and started looking at best practices, what's happening in other parts of the world, and building it. So 2013, we launched in the middle of literally really political turmoil, but we just launched. We had 5 startups. None of them is alive today. They were all graduation projects for students, and we just called them startups, and we started working with them. The program was basically a bit of mentorship, and that's it. But what I learned is, first thing, you have to literally put the flag and raise the flag and say, we're doing this. When you raise the flag and say, we're doing this, especially if it's new, people who are interested come to you, and you start building that ecosystem around you. So that's one part. Second thing is, you don't need to have a perfect model because you don't know what the model is going to look like. So just start with something and then keep growing it and improving it. So now it's been 10 years. This year we're celebrating our 10th anniversary. It's a very, very different thing. They're much more advanced and complex organization. Lots of models and lessons learned. So that is something that you grow incrementally. You're not going to make a big bang and grow a perfect program immediately. So we've been basically working with the industry and the university, building it one step at a time. And to your point about universities being slow, yes, absolutely. The lesson is that you have to have your own resources to be able to operate well inside that environment. So bring the partners around you, people who are stakeholders who really care about this, and build it one step at a time. And then people wouldn't notice, but suddenly 5, 6, 7 years later, they have something big that they have in their backyard that didn't even know that it existed. So that's the story.
Just to give everyone the idea of how successful AUC VC Lab and Center for Entrepreneurship has been, of course, Ayman is the chairman of a company called PayMob. PayMob is a very successful startup that has raised more than $50 million. It actually operates in Pakistan, is doing very well in Pakistan. The startups backed by AUC have created more than 8,500 jobs. They have raised a total of 3 billion pounds of investments over a period of time. They have an angel. They have angels of 40 angels in the network, and they have done 2,300 of mentoring hours through the VC lab. And I think you would have more updated numbers, and you can correct me on that. But that's a phenomenal success for a new industry. And they have a startup launchpad, and then they have an accelerator, and then particularly a fintech accelerator. So tell us a little bit more about the programs, add more flavor to them. How does it operate for students and the different programs that you run?
Yeah, that's very interesting, Ahmed, because when we started at the beginning, this was a very tiny operation. But what happens is that you gradually keep adding more building blocks to it. So I'll give you a great example. 2016, nobody was talking about fintech at that point in time, at least in our part of the world. So we started having discussions with one of the top banks in Egypt, and they were saying we're interested to understand that space because we have an internal strategy in that space. And we partnered together. We launched our fintech acceleration program. And that was a very transformative point because a couple of years later, 40% of the investments in startups in Egypt goes to fintech. It's one of the fastest growing areas. And we have produced roughly 1/3 of the startups in Egypt in fintech. So a big part has been early on the curves of a lot of the new sectors or the new trends that are happening. Now we're looking at the same thing in the same way at data and AI and analytics. It's an interesting area, and also the green and climate related. That's also another good area. So we always want to look at what are the new areas where there are investments and there are potential change coming. How did we build this up? We started with our startup acceleration program, started growing the numbers, growing the quality. We started initially with students or recent grads, but now we're actually catering to young and mid-career professionals. Average age is in the early 30s. We've got people all the way from the mid-20s to even late 40s and sometimes early 50s. Most of them are not graduates of AUC, so we're a community service. We're actually targeting entrepreneurs of all backgrounds, coming from all walks of life. They're not people coming from business schools or engineering schools. We've got people coming from all kinds of majors and experiences that you can imagine. We focus on innovation and tech because I think that's an interesting part. But beyond that, everything is open. We started the acceleration, then fintech acceleration. Then we don't give investments, so we wanted to add an investment side, so we added an angels network to it. And now we've got very interesting startups who graduated from our part, and they're doing great things. PayMob, which I'm personally involved in, was not part of AUC Venture Lab because they started around the same time. We're actually students in my class wanting to do a startup. And at that point, VLab was literally in the first year. So I actually worked with them and coached them. And it was a very similar journey. You want to get into a space, the space is underdeveloped, so you look for opportunities. And this is probably the one single lesson learned that I got from my personal Fox life and also from working with startups. You can create as many plans as you want, and it's great to do plans, to plan. Planning is important, but the artifact itself is not important. I had plans for my life, and I had them written in sheets of paper with exactly what I'm going to do at the age of 26 and 28 and 30 and 32, with very specific objectives. And none of these things materialized in the same way at the same time. But the most important thing is, out of those plans and whatever you do, is that they place you in the position where opportunities are coming. So, and this, I tell startups the same thing. It's not about the plan and it's not about the execution at the beginning. It's about being in an interesting place where there are interesting things happening and positioning yourself at the center of that place. That's actually the most important part. And then the opportunities evolve much faster than what you know and in different ways that you have not seen before. Because the plan is a reflection of what you know, but you don't know what's going to happen a year or two down the road because you cannot see it because it's not shaped yet. And it's not shaped by you, it's shaped by other factors around us. So make your plan your plan, but don't worry about it. Make sure that you are putting yourself in an interesting place. And interesting means growing, futuristic, evolving, uncharted, underdeveloped. And then when you're at that place, opportunities will show themselves. And then the most successful person or startup are the ones who are able to capture those opportunities. You need to be able to execute, you need to be really good in the right place and the right time. If you get this formula, you're going to have amazing things happen.
No, fantastic, and I think that tells a lot about what makes a venture succeed, and it's doing it. It's not an exercise in intellect or thinking or even strategy. Of course, that's important, but it's actually getting onto the field and doing things. And I do think that Egyptians, I've known, they are very street smart. They're also good negotiators. Also, they're natural entrepreneurs. So I'm sure that helps.
Definitely does help.
And so you have some successful startups, the Instabug and Nava Scientific, Money Fellows, Elves, Whiteboard that have come out of AUC. Tell us which ones are your favorite, although they are all your children. And so it's difficult to say who's your favorite. But if you have the top 3 ones, share with us a little bit about their model. What do they do? And why do you feel they have a great future, both as successful ventures, possibly as exits for their investors?
Okay. So I'll tell you different startups. Some of them came from different contexts. But Paymob, you mentioned that this is probably my most favorite startup. And
which one is it?
Paymob.
Paymob. Okay, Paymob. Yes.
So Paymob did not come out of AUC Venture Lab because they started around the same time, 2014, 15. But it was a very interesting story because the space itself, the payment space, was completely underdeveloped in Egypt at that point in time when they started. The regulations were not there, technology was not there, and they were very creative in looking after opportunities. They looked at different opportunities, evolved with the market. And this is exactly about the point I was making about being at the right time at the right place. So if you have a really smart team that's able to execute quickly and is getting into an interesting space at the right time, you will have an opportunity. They were, through the first products that they created connections also with the banks, with the regulator, with the schemes, and they placed themselves as a very fast-moving, smart, up-and-coming company in that space. So when opportunities started emerging, they were the first to capture it, and they were the first that the other partners in the stakeholder reach out to say, okay, we have this opportunity, can you work with us on this new product, which evolved into a new product, which evolved into a second product, the third product, the fourth product, and so on. Until some of those products started actually getting to scale. So you could not plan that in 2014 or 15 in Egypt because nobody could project the market trajectory at that point in time. But you can plan being in the right place, in an interesting place at the right time. That's what you can do. So that's the Paymob story. Another story, another startup also came from AUC Venture Lab, and it came from one of my classes, Click It. They're also doing payments, but they're focusing on the educational sector, schools and universities and nurseries. And they're doing an amazing job in enabling the educational sector, the payment, and also the lending in that space. Just to put this in perspective, they're working now with more than 55,000 schools more than 25 million students in Egypt, operating in 5 countries in MENA and Africa, with very interesting growth. And again, fantastic team, and they spent several years bootstrapping. This is another lesson that I learned. Teams that bootstrap extensively at the beginning, they learn how to move faster. They learn the value of money. They're usually more frugal in spending money, and they are more, not should I say, more prudent in the steps that they make, as opposed to teams that raise huge amounts very early and they just focus on spending money. And usually they get stuck very quickly when they run out of money. They don't have that resilience in the business. So these are different startups that came out of there. And we have many startups now in the lineup that are in the early stage, and you can hear about them in the next year or two, especially in the fintech sector. Some of them, the cycle takes maybe 2-3 years until they get through the partnerships and regulations, but they're getting there. So we'll hear some interesting stories in 2024, inshallah.
And one thing I want to clarify, the amount that they have raised is 3 billion Egyptian pounds, which is equal to 111 million British pounds, which is still a lot of money. And one of the things that was interesting I found in one of the criteria, and I don't know whether how accurately it is implemented, is that they look for companies that have co-founders. So not a single founder, but a co-founder. And I believe PayMob also has multiple founders. I've certainly met Khazna in Egypt. They have multiple founders. Tell us a little bit more about your thinking behind having more than a single or a sole founder. And what is your thinking behind it?
We know startups that have teams. And look, whenever people ask me about the criteria for picking good startups, I think it's very simple. You want to pick a startup that's operating in an interesting space and they have a strong team. So that's really the bottom line. So we talked about the interesting space. It's a space that's growing, up and coming, not shaped yet, has some ambiguity, and also a way to plays that have not been discovered yet. And then the interesting team, it's a team that's able to make this happen. And they come in different varieties. Solo founders, sometimes we take them, sometimes I work with them. But it's very risky. You want to have a team that they know each other, they've worked with each other before, they complement each other. So not the 3 marketeers or the 3 engineers or the 3 finance people, but the best usually someone who's a techie, someone who's got the marketing and the sales experience, and someone who's a good operator. If you have those 3, which usually you get a very nice mix. Because those 3 mixes can actually build a company. So I always look at the skill sets in the team and how they actually work together and trust each other and they're able to develop those synergies. Just one thing about the numbers that you mentioned, Ahmed. So far, VLab, I'll tell you the updated numbers. So far, we have 350 startups that graduated, around $250 million of investments collectively in them. 12,000 jobs, direct and indirect, that were generated through those companies. So those are basically the top things.
Great to hear from you directly, the up-to-date numbers, and that's certainly fantastic. In a region where they say your clock operates in a much longer horizon. To have achieved all of this within 10 years is certainly fantastic and a huge contribution to both wealth generation, economic development, and because you did a PhD in economic development, also international development. So I think it's very relevant, but also more importantly, create hope in a society where, opportunities are much rare for people to break poverty or to change their socio-economic status. And I think venture or technology is a great way to do that. And, if you offer that at a university level, it's a great chance for people to be hopeful and to be able to change their life of their families, life of the communities, and life of the government.
Absolutely. I think that you mentioned a statement about hope, and I think hope is a very important part, especially in tough times. And we have tough economic times in Egypt right now. And I think everybody's struggling to find an anchor or something that will actually trigger hope around them. So it's very important to maintain that. Eventually, as they say, that too shall pass. So you will have good times and the bad times always there. But I think in bad times or tough times, it's very important to stick to hope and try to look for people who would tell you that, you know what, there is a better day that's coming, so let's just keep working and something better will happen.
I want to ask you another thing is how concentrated your companies, of course you are AUC, so how many companies, percentage of them are non-Cairo based companies that you've backed that have set up businesses outside of Cairo?
The majority of them are Cairo based. I don't recall the exact number about the ones outside of Cairo, but I would say it's about 10%. But here's what happens in Egypt is Cairo's got about 20% of the population. It's the economic center by far. So whenever you have a company, even one that is started in a different city, and it gets to the growth, usually they move to Cairo at some point in time. So they might have operations outside of Cairo. There are many companies that have either logistics or distribution, or sometimes even software development locations outside of Cairo. But usually they end up putting their headquarters in Cairo, some of them in Alexandria as the biggest city, and there's some other varieties. But we are and remain Cairo-centric for whatever.
And no harm in that, absolutely, because what people realize is the rise of countries or nations is the rise of cities. You know, there would not be a British Empire without London, and there wouldn't be an Austro-Hungarian Empire without Vienna. You know, if you look at Japan is basically industrialization focused in Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka. They are the three countries. So it's mainly around cities where it happens. And that really gets me to the next point is there a collaboration? Because literally after Cairo, if you're a successful company in Cairo, you might as well come out of Egypt and go to another country rather than go to Alexandria or a smaller country. Could be. And so is there a collaboration that can happen? And this is the theory that I've been proposing, is that maybe there is a Cairo, Lagos, Karachi strategy. Because what I felt is Lahore, for that matter, is within Pakistan, but it's a very different culture, very different environment. If I've operated in Karachi, I go and operate in Lahore, I might lose my shirt because it's a very different mindset. Whereas if I operate and I'm successful in Karachi, I may have more similarity to Cairo, okay, or to Lagos, because they are similar, huge 20, 25 million population cities. Then say for matter Islamabad or Lahore. Do you think there is a Cairo, Lagos and a Karachi strategy for companies to become unicorns?
What I'm seeing on the ground is I'm seeing actually the Egypt or the Cairo and Pakistan and the GCC, Saudi or Emirates actually coming more common. Not the Lagos one. Lagos is a very tough place to operate. Large market, huge opportunity, but very hard to operate. But I'm seeing a lot into the Pakistan, Egypt, GCC both as an opportunity and as a reality on the ground. There are many companies that are coming from those three countries that are going to using the others as the expansion path, and I think that's good. Within those three regions, you probably have close to 400 million in population, substantial market, and also substantial investment, and also sufficient talent. So
yes,
if we can develop those, I think that's a fantastic opportunity. Turkey would have been a great addition. I've not seen that coming as much as I would have loved to, but I think it would have been a great addition and probably a gateway to Europe in a way. But I've not seen that. The Africa part, for the countries that I see Egyptian startups going to, I see more often Kenya, South Africa, Tanzania, rather than Nigeria. I think Nigeria is huge, but it's also not as easy to penetrate. I think Kenya is a fantastic market. very open and easy to do business. So it's a great kind of segue into getting into the sub-Saharan African context.
Kenya also has great weather and very nice beaches and a nice place to live, as you know, Mombasa and other places. Plus, it has got a lot of course, Nigeria is hugely Muslim also, but also Kenya has a huge Muslim population around the coastline. And they started with M-Pesa quite early on. So one thing I would say to you, and you talked about GCC, Pakistan, and Cairo. So, I used to, when I lived abroad for 19 years, I used to think there's a Pakistan strategy, but I've realized there is no such thing as a Pakistan strategy. Why? There is no Pakistan as a business opportunity. Pakistan is not a single opportunity. There are literally three parts of the country, and they operate very differently. And so I look more at cities. So if I'm operating in Pakistan, I'm operating in Karachi. And Pakistan can be growing, and sometimes Pakistan doesn't grow that fast, in 3, 4, 5%. But Karachi, with its immigration, with its own dynamics, is probably growing at 10 to 12%. And so when I'm thinking about investing in Pakistan, I'm thinking about investing in Karachi. And of course, Pakistan is important for the regulatory framework, but in terms of business opportunity, it is a city opportunity that I'm looking to grow. And that's a 25 million population city. So I would think about a Riyadh, Cairo, Karachi strategy, or Riyadh, Dubai, Karachi strategy, rather than a Saudi or Egypt or Pakistan strategy.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at ecosystems, they evolve around cities. And I completely agree with you. So when people say entrepreneurship in Egypt and you have to spread it all over the rural areas, I tell them no. Entrepreneurship is about really a critical mass of people that is very, very concentrated in an area, usually around the university and usually in a big city. That's what you have. You don't have a US entrepreneurship ecosystem. You have a Silicon Valley or a Boston or a Research Triangle or Ann Arbor. Those are the around cities, because it's about the concentration of people rather than anything. That's the first point. When you get into markets, it depends on the product. So sometimes some products, it's great to go in cities. Cities are very different. The dynamics are different. Sometimes you might go outside of the cities because it's not crowded, and there might be more interested purchasing power, even though it might be fragmented. So it depends on what product you're in. But I'll give you an example. E-commerce in Egypt. E-commerce is growing big time both in Cairo and in other cities. But if you go outside of Cairo, there's a very big interest in e-commerce. You'll be surprised in rural areas. Why? Because they don't have the big shopping malls. They don't have the access to product. But when they go online on your platform, they have access to every single product that the people of Cairo have. So it's a fantastic opportunity for e-commerce, for example, to go beyond the cities, the big ones, and go and sell their products where people do not have access to those products. Your challenge becomes logistics. How do you deliver the product? But there are more patients because they don't have other options. People in Cairo, if they don't like your platform, they can walk for 5 minutes to the mall and buy. So it's a very different dynamic. So that, I think, depends on the business model. There are business models that might be single city centric, or others that might be urban, multiple cities, and others that might be actually the whole country, or even outside of the big cities, depending on the opportunity that you're seeking and your strategy and so on.
That's a fair point. And I think the same trend we've seen in Pakistan, where rural, semi-rural consumption, because it's fueled a lot by agriculture, and agriculture prices have gone up. And so there is a lot of wealth. Plus, there's a lot of aspirational spenders who normally have not historically spent. So, they would say there is this drama serial. In this drama, there is this lady who wears this yellow clothes, and then she uses this shampoo or this soap, and I want that soap. It goes to that extent. So there is a lot more awareness that has come in, and hence a lot more consumption. But then you face the logistics problem, and that first you need to solve it city by city, and then grow from there.
Absolutely. But that's very interesting. That's what makes those markets very interesting, because whoever is able to solve the problems that you described gets access to a really large market that is nascent, that is untapped, and that you can actually build a business, a competitive business around. That's a huge opportunity.
Absolutely. And so one thing I want to ask you about, saying if I was a founder, because there has been a lot of incubation services that have sprung up. There has been a boom. There is not only a boom in startups, there is a boom in incubation and incubators. So, what are the important elements of service value creation incubator must provide? Because some of them, literally what they do is they organize talks with people, and they expect everything else to happen, and there's very little hand holding. So number one, what does AUC provide as part of its program, very specific things that it provides as value creation? And then what are the core basic minimum things that incubators should be able to provide to a startup for anyone to sign up for it? And also tell us about the revenue model, the equity model, if there is any. How do you get support yourself sustainably, and what kind of a share do you take from the startups?
So AUC is a little bit of a special model. We're an accelerator. We have a very short cycle, a semester. We follow the academic calendar because we're a university. So startups come in September. They spend 3.5 months with us. We work with them on developing their company. We pick onto startups that are in the go-to-market stage, so they're either already selling their product or they're just about to start selling. So it's not idea stage or very early stage. It's basically we follow the go-to-market stage or the launch stage, because we believe this is where we can make the highest impact. We work with them for that duration on validating and retesting their business model. A lot of people are basically jumping to the market, but they have not thought through their products well. So we kind of question that and help them make sure that whatever they're going to market with is actually the right product, the right pricing, the right mix, the right channels, and so on. Second thing, we work with them on the operational side, coaching them on building the company. We have a couple of people who have had extensive business experience that work with them, and it's more about let's move and get things done tomorrow. How are you doing with setting the pace for the company? Do you have the right talent? Do you have the right formula? What are the challenges that you're facing on the operational side? And third is investment readiness. Everybody's thinking about investment and raising. We work with them on first, do you really need money, or can you actually bootstrap? And if you do, what's the best avenue? And then are you ready for that with the right data room and documents and financials and projections and pitch deck and all of that? And then let's connect you to the right people. So we work with them on that side. People walk in 100% focused on investment, raising, and they believe that they have everything else right. Mm-hmm. And we work very hard to question, do you really have everything right? Let's just make sure you do. And most of the time it ends up that they know that's not the case. So let's revisit some of the aspects of the product and market, and then let's get you ready for the investment if you need it. And I push a lot for bootstrapping. So I tell people investment is, if you need it, it's a necessary evil, because it takes a lot of time and effort from the startup to focus on the fundraising and on meeting the requirements of VCs. If you can go without that, if you can go only with angels, if you can build a company without needing external investment, that is your best bet. And not everybody understands that or buys into it, because they see the investment as a KPI for success, but I really push hard. As a program, we're actually a non-profit organization and a non-profit program, so we don't take equity from the startups. We're 100% funded by the university and industry. The university provides us with the platform and the space and some support. And we have industry partners, corporates and banks that basically are providing everything. So we're a community service organization, not an equity-based model. Working on creating our own venture capital fund, but that would be kind of a complementary fund rather than at the core of the acceleration. So that's what we do.
Endeavor has successfully done that from being mentoring into going into a venture capital fund, and I think that is the future of incubation. As long as you can add significant value to the companies and you can show you can do that and attract the right talent.
Absolutely, and I work a lot with Endeavor. It's one of my most favorite organizations. I was actually on a mentoring session with a fantastic Pakistani entrepreneur 3 days ago, and I really enjoyed it. And it's a fantastic organization, Endeavor.
Well, was it like a current Endeavor founder or someone who's going through the process?
Someone going through the process. Yeah.
Going through the process.
But a fantastic person. I'll tell you about it after we finish the show.
Yeah.
But a really amazing entrepreneur, and I was very excited to see someone like him and with that mindset working on the market in Pakistan. And we talked about the Egypt opportunity and when and how and the differences. It was a really interesting.
So the thing about Egyptians and Pakistanis, we are very similar. In fact, I think we are very individually talented, but something goes wrong when we work together as groups. We're not able.
It's usually about creating the right system and structure.
Yeah, and there is a complementarity. I think Egyptians are Pakistan are because of engineering and some kind of both. So we have got good bankers historically. And number two, I think we have got good product people, technology people. Historically, we've had that. And I think Egyptians are more creative. I think their creative side is much stronger. And I think marketing, sales side is very strong. And I think there could be a lot of synergy in terms of the natural skill set of the people. The Turks, if we combine the Egyptian, the Turks and Pakistanis, will become a superpower. But very difficult to get Turks to collaborate.
The rest is usually teams that have had international experience working in different parts of the world, from Egypt, from Pakistan, from the region in general. Because I think once you've had that experience of working internationally, you understand how to deal with cultural differences. You understand how to operate in different countries and markets. You become very sensitive to the local context in Pakistan versus Egypt versus Turkey versus Saudi, and how you can actually work around that. So I think that's usually the beginning. Maybe people who work in consulting in different countries, and then they build teams and they have another language that helps them kind of build that company together. So I hope to see more of that. But back to your question about incubators and accelerators and enablers in general, I think there are many of them that are popping up, but many of the ones that I see are basically funded by short-term development funding, development programs, whether local or international, that are basically funding them. And unfortunately, I see many that don't have sustainable models or that are not creating enough value that they would be able to attract investments over the long term. So it's an area that needs to think and rethink their model a lot and make sure that, to your point, you're adding enough value that people want to put the money in you. Venture capital or taking equity is attractive, but it's a bit overrated because first, if you're picking the right companies and you're really good, you don't have to wait almost for a decade until some of these investments have exited and paid off. So you have to finance yourself for the next 10 years, assuming you're really good. You still have to finance yourself for 10 years until you find something. That's one part. And the second is that most of the time, the programs that take substantial equity at the beginning, they're actually not attracting the best founders. Because the best founders don't want to give that much equity at the beginning for a program, and they believe that we can actually get access. So it's one of two things. It's either that you operate an equity program like ours, so we try to attract really good founders, and we say, you know what, we're helping you, but we're not taking equity. So we'd love to have you, and we give you a lot of support and access and so on. But if you're taking that equity, you have to justify it. I mean, let's say, what's the value of the 10% that you're taking? Is it 100,000, 200,000, $500,000 in that company? So are you providing value that's worth that much? And that's the question. Pairing with VC funds, I think it's very useful. But I think the funds that are starting support programs, like 500 startups and the like, are probably going to be more successful than the support programs that are starting funds. Endeavor is an exception because they work with growth phase startups, so they manage the transition. I don't think it's easy to raise a fund on an accelerator. Not easy. So it's probably better to have a fund and look for a support program that fits the profile that you're bringing and increases the chances of success. So this area, I think it's still there's a big boom, but I think it still needs a lot of rethinking.
No, I think so. And I think there's a lot to learn. And I think a lot of people can learn from your experience in AUC and have you build it together and focus on the long term. Venture building, venture creation could be a 10-year exercise. And there is no short term or shortcut. I'm going to ask you a tough question in the sense that, we've had some blow ups in our markets where some of the ventures took a lot of money up front, created a lot of hoo-ha on LinkedIn and profiling. And then when the funding got withdrawn, they realized that they had spent too much money or too much money had leaked. The founders didn't have the right experience in the right areas. And frankly, a lot of money was lost. And, I always say to people, and I've spoken to people in the Silicon Valley, and they say, look, I'll put $10 million in Pakistan. I've got $1 billion fund. If it goes down to zero, I'm not too bothered about it because that's the risk I take. And I said, no, man, don't do that. We don't need your $10 million to go down to zero. We need your $10 million to succeed and for that to become a $50 million and $100 million check down the road. So if you don't take decisions carefully and vet them carefully, more so in emerging markets, and we need more vetting than in Silicon Valley for many obvious reasons, then, that money is actually more dangerous for us because it will distort the market. It'll probably back the wrong founders. And then when that money runs away because it didn't make the right bet, and frankly, it didn't make the right bet because you didn't do the right due diligence, then the system suffers even more and everyone gets brushed with the same brush. So tell us more about that events in our markets, how to prevent it, how to smell when a founder is more interested in the profile and raising money, higher salary, rather than building equity value.
Okay, that I can talk about this for probably an hour because that's tough and that's a very important question. I think. So let's take it one point at a time. So first, you have startups running out of money and basically, well, there are two things. One, some of them are good startups. They just got stuck in the cycle of fundraising. So they were expecting to raise after 18 months or 24 months. And then at the time when they were ready to go to the investors, the economy globally had their problems. And the fundraising cycle got extended by another year because nobody wants to give money in that point of period of uncertainty globally. So they got stuck running out of cash. And they're good business fundamentally, and they were doing the right formula. It just they got stuck in a bad time. So there are some of the stories that you're hearing are those types of companies. There are other types of companies where it's just a bad model, and the only reason that they were surviving is by the repetitive cycle of fundraising. And at some point in time, this would have had to happen. It just happened now. Okay? So those are two different stories. I think people mix them and they rely on both of them. And it's very important to say, no, not all the companies that are blowing up right now are just bad companies. Some are, some are not. So let's put this aside. So that's one point. And the lesson learned out of this is be very careful about the fundraising cycle and don't put yourself on a very high burn rate when the market, remember, we're still in emerging markets, the level of uncertainty is high. So your ability to raise multiple repetitive large rounds is very risky. Even if your business is good, you're not in Silicon Valley. The market risk on top of the company risk. The company risk is high, but the market risk is high. So be very careful about extending your run rate substantially. I would go for at least 36 months and starting the fundraising cycle very early, or even doing bridges in the middle, so that you're always a couple of years safe on the spending. You cannot go on a 6 or 3 month runway in Pakistan or in Egypt in the same way you are in Boston or in Silicon Valley. So that's one part, managing the cash flow and the fundraising cycle. Now, to the companies that are not doing well, a lot of people from the global perspective, the international funds, they say, you know what, I'm interested in the following play. I'm interested in quick commerce, dark stores. I'm interested in logistics. I'm interested in a payment play. And I'm looking at the so they look at it top down. And they say, okay, this company is in Pakistan or in Egypt or in whatever. It fits the sector that I'm interested in. It fits the region that I'm interested in. Seems okay, let me pick them. So that's more of the kind of macro thinking. It's good for portfolio construction for a venture capital fund, but it's not good in picking winners at the local level. So I think it's a very important, if you're operating in emerging markets, it's very important to look at picking winners rather than portfolio construction. Because if you're operating in Silicon Valley, you're going to have 100 companies in the same space to construct your portfolio, and picking from them is easy. When you're operating in Pakistan or Egypt, you're not going to have those 100 teams, and you have to be really zooming in on picking really solid teams. So that's another part. The third part, which is very tricky, and I tell this to entrepreneurs, I've been saying it more recently actually, every single time I sit with entrepreneurs. You are raising, how much do you want to raise? I want to raise $3 million. Fantastic. At what valuation? $20 million valuation. Fantastic. And then, okay. So the investor is expecting 10x after 6, 7, whatever it is. Can you create a company that's worth $200 million? And by the way, there's going to be valuation and that. And by the way, at the time of exit, you're a normal business. You're no longer the hyper growth. So you're going to be valued at an EBITDA multiple. What's that? That's a profit multiple. And say, what's that? Profit. Yes, it's profit. It's not revenues. So how much profit can you generate? Okay, so what's your margin? Assuming you're mature and you're doing well and everything is good. Okay, so your profit margin is 10. So you want to be generating that much revenues to be able to value at that much EBITDA multiple. How much of an EBITDA multiple? 20x, 25x, that's very generous. 15x is normal, 20x is good. Look at how much is Microsoft or Apple are being valued at. Those are great growth companies. You're not going to be better than Microsoft or Apple. So let's pick 20 or 25x EBITDA. For you to generate 25x, to generate that EBITDA number, then you need to have that revenue. Can you meet that revenue number? You look at the number and they get shocked. Lesson number one, a single country cannot meet that revenue number. So if you want to reach that, you have to actually be operating in 2 or 3 large countries and be mature at that point and generate that much revenue. Can you do that? And the answer is most of the time, no. Okay, so the question is, let's follow the trail of the money all the way to the end, to the exit point, and then come back. When you do that journey back and forth, then people start actually having a reality. And then you're better off raising a smaller amount at a smaller valuation, a lower valuation. And people don't like that.
Yes.
And okay, then good luck. And by the way, if you raise that much money, you're going to be stuck in the next round. If you're not stuck in the next round, you're going to be stuck in the round after, because you're going to keep pushing your valuation. You start at 20, next round you're going to raise at 100, the following round you're going to raise at 200. And at 200, the investor is expecting maybe 3x, maybe 4x, maybe 5x, can you reach $1 billion? And you start doing the math, and you create that much revenue to support the $1 billion valuation. And that revenue is not possible out of Egypt or Pakistan. You have to operate in Egypt, Saudi, and Pakistan and have sizable market share.
Yeah.
They'll do that.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's the reality. And I don't know why investors are not doing that calculus with the startups. There's some investments that are going into companies that I just don't see how we can do that. You mentioned at the beginning the pets.com and all of that. I was in the US when this pets.com euphoria happened. And here is the math that people did. This is the market size for pet foods, and we're going to get 100% market share. Okay? And I think, okay, fantastic. Now, there are two problems. One problem is that there are 3 startups, each claiming to have 100% market share. Okay? So the first outcome is the valuation of startups in this space is 3 times the valuation of what this market is worth. Okay? So 2 of them have to die, or if the 3 survive, the 3 are going to be 1/3. Okay, so that's the first problem. Second problem, there are incumbents here. Those incumbents are not going to go away.
Yes, sit there.
They're still here today. So you might get collectively 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 market share, but it's not going to be 100. So let's bring it back to reality. 3 companies sharing 50% market share. So you might have 10 to 15% market share at success and maturity. That's fantastic. How much valuation does that give you? That's your ceiling. Okay, so let's go for that ceiling and let's push for getting that success, but that is what success looks like. So my 2 problems. One is people exaggerate what success looks like. Okay, and the second thing is they don't have a roadmap of taking us from here to there. And in absence of that thinking, you cannot make a decent venture capital investment. Venture is about taking risk, but it's a risk that you can execute on the claim, not a risk that the claim itself is completely overblown. So this is why many of the companies are not anchored. Let's correct your claim, and I'm taking risk that you guys can execute towards that claim. That's my actual risk, but not the risk that you have inflated the claim to the point that it just doesn't make any sense for you. The price does not exist.
So, you absolutely, and said very maturely, and that's the right way to take it, that top down, America and UK you can operate top down because those economies are very stable and there are a lot less market risk in them. So you can maximize business risk and by taking a spray and pray approach. But in our markets, a lot of people, even myself, when I lived abroad and I came back and I thought things work like X, and I realized things don't work like X, they work like Z. These markets are very bottoms-up market. The reality on the ground from bottom drives everything all the way to the top. If you think you can come and meet the prime minister and president and get things done, that's not how things work. You need to start from way up, from junior bureaucracy, and work your way up to get things done the right way. And similarly is about venture, that you need to have much more operationally hands-on understanding of the market dynamics, the operational reality of the business, rather than a top-down approach. And that's why you need local operators, people who have local experience, who bring in international capital to invest locally. But when I've seen international capital come in and basically boom, 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 invest everywhere, and I'm going to throw in $10 million, which is a lot of money in these markets, it has mostly ended up not good for both the investors, but also the local market.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the international investors, there are 2 ways that I've seen them investing. One is they look for investments that have received a couple of local rounds, and then they get a little bit later. So if you manage to get the 200, 300, $500,000 and invest it wisely and build something, and then after that you got the $1 or $2 million and also invest them wisely, I think you're ready for the $10 million check. So, and I like that approach a lot because they're basically doubling down on companies that have already done something on the ground.
Yeah.
Doesn't need to be big, but they've done something on the ground. They have the ability to execute. Their business has shown some numbers. You have something to look at. That's one part. The second approach, and that's very risky, is I've seen them basically bet on people. So you know what, Ahmed is fantastic. He graduated from Harvard. He worked in Bain 15 times, 15 years in this and that. So he's the kind of founder I want to bet on. And the opportunity looks interesting because I've seen this business done in 5 other countries and nobody's doing it in Pakistan or Egypt or whatever. So you know what, I think this guy is great. I'm going to bet on him. And let me just go in with the $10 million check very quickly, or the 5 million or whatever, and skipping that first 1 or 2 stages. And I've seen that. At the end of the day, it's their money. It's a very risky bet, but I've seen that happen a couple of times, several times actually, in those emerging markets. I understand where the global VC is coming from. They want someone that they can deal with. And I think people who come with international experience, consulting experience are fantastic. But unless you have someone who's able to operate on the ground and execute on the ground, I don't think they're going to.
Yes, absolutely.
Proper COO with a good understanding of what's happening in the ground. What happens is they make very expensive mistakes. That's what happens. If you lack the ground street smart savvy in your team, you're going to make very, very expensive mistakes. If you have too much money, you might be able to hide them, kind of throw them under the rug, but sometimes that's not the case.
So what are your parting thoughts about where Egypt is? It's facing a depreciation percentage, which is very similar to Pakistan. And so what is your advice to startups at this time? It is on the way down, so it must be about cost cutting and preserving cash. But what is your hope for the future? And you've seen the dot-com crash. Now you've seen another recession, looming recession. So what are your parting thoughts to founders, to incubation managers at this stage of the cycle?
No, so first Egypt and then startups and enablers. So what's happening in Egypt is actually very tricky because you have a mix of multiple things happening at the same time. One is the global macro environment is tightening. So we know that, whether it's Ukraine or interest rates and so on. The second is basically repeated domestic policy mistakes that happened one after the other over a long term. Part of it is overinvestment from the states that's basically crowding out private sector. Another part is macro problems of fixing the currency for 6-7 years, so the currency becomes overvalued, which basically hinders your exporters, creates a substantial balance of payment problems. So you end up with shortages of dollars, and then you deal with it in the wrong way. So you end up basically hurting the local businesses really severely. So two things at the same time, and the global market's shutting down. So it's harder for you to basically get even support money because the global macro environment is tough. So you put those two things together, it's not good plans. I think sooner or later it's just going to pass because you will have to. We're very resilient as an economy. The problem is that people pay the price. That's what's the problem. And usually the people who pay the price are usually the poorest people or the middle class, the ones that pay the highest price. And this is what we are right now. We're in the middle of trying to get out of it, and the price is high, and the people are paying that price as we speak. That's where we are. Are we going to get out of it? Yeah, absolutely. It's going to happen. It's going to take a year, maybe 2. I think we're just going to, usually the recovery, the pain is 1.5 years, and then you start getting to the recovery. So I think by 2024, the market is going to be back. However, given the current dynamics, if you're an international investor, Egypt is a great opportunity, because now you move from an overvalued currency to actually an undervalued currency. Asset prices in Egypt are now really below fair value, whether it's companies or properties. So if you want to invest in the country as an international investor, it's a fantastic time. And the second is that the country needs the money, so you're going to be really welcomed in getting all the kind of facilities and support that you need, whether from the government or business community. So for anybody who wants to get into a country like this, despite the fear, this is the time to put your money, because that's when you're going to make a good multiple, just because you're getting in at the downturn. It's like buying the bottom in the stock market. When everybody's yelling and screaming, that's the time to buy. When everybody's sitting and happy with the high prices, that's the time to be very careful.
Yes.
So emerging markets, Egypt is exactly the same. So that's for the economy itself. In terms of the startups, my advice to them now, it's a survival game. Those who will be standing in 2024, forget about growth, forget about top line, forget about all of these things. Those who will be standing in 2024 are going to actually be the winners. We're going to attract the next wave of capital. Now the question is, what's the price? Do you need to shrink? How much do you need to shrink? What's your cash flow? How do you manage to kind of adjust your cash flow and operations to survive that time? That's the question. Some startups do have money, and for them, I tell them this is a great time for acquisitions, a great time for growth, but not for kind of stupid spending. Don't overspend, but do spend. If you have the money, that's a great time for entering market. Okay. So look around for opportunities. Right now, I'm looking for some startups that are looking at mergers and acquisitions opportunities, international growth opportunities, local growth opportunities, depending on each one, depending on the situation. This whole mindset of it's time to shrink and cut costs, it doesn't apply to everybody. Because if you actually have the cash and the runway for 2 years, actually that's not the time to cut costs. That's the time to double down. So it's a case-by-case situation, depending on your cash situation, the stage you're in, your access to investments, and how long you think you have to reach something that's close to at least cash flow, being cash flow positive. Not breaking, but being cash flow positive.
And that's very interesting advice, both at the macro level. One cannot forget about the macro in our society, in our economies, to keep an eye on that, but also at the micro, in your immediate surrounding of a startup. And I think this has been a fascinating experience from someone who has really defined and built the incubation VC lab in a university, in the top university of the region. And I think this brings us to the end of the session, and we end where we started, which is what is entrepreneurship about, and what is successful entrepreneurship is about. And I always quote from Zen Buddhism, which goes about the height of spiritual achievement is symbolized by a mountain, and it is a mountain because it's a mountain is grounded on earth, but it reaches for the sky. So a founder must be really much operationally grounded, and so must be in control of his supply chain, must be in control of his cost, the operational reality of the business. But then he must also be inspirational, be hopeful, be able to see beyond the current difficulties of the market 2023 and imagine how it would be like 2024 and prepare himself for that. It is the yin and yang combined together that makes for fantastic founders. And I think AUC VC Lab and the work that Ayman has done, both bringing in his experience from McKinsey, Boston, from New York, into Egypt, but being operationally on the ground to know what is the best in the world, which is mostly in the West, and apply that and customize that to the reality of markets like Cairo to Karachi, offer the best place forward. And I think for a lot of international VCs, when they're looking to invest, they should back up AUC VC Lab, their forthcoming fund, that is coming, that hopefully will be coming soon. As someone led by someone who understands how the Western VC model works and also has made it a success in local market. I think there's a lot of learning for us in Pakistan. I think Egyptian businesses have been very successful. Their rounds have been, on the whole, being bigger than us. And so, how can we learn? How can we collaborate between Egypt, between Cairo and Karachi, to make our ventures more successful, more grounded, and yet more internationally focused? I think that is going to define in 2023. I think that's all from the alchemy of venture creation. I think it was a fantastic session. We're very pleased to have Ayman with us, and over till the next time.